Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 4th of July. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to discuss the report of Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. They gave us new numbers and as a result of their attack during the previous hours, the Russians attacked this 92nd Mechanized Brigade, and as a result of that attack this brigade lost something around 130 soldiers and up to 13 armored vehicles. The area between Kharkiv and between Izum bridgehead, this line like Kharkiv, Chuguyev, Balakleya, Izum bridgehead, this area is under their responsibility. I'm not saying that this is the only brigade located on this bank of the river. There are a lot of forces like this tank brigade, like this 103rd Defense Brigade and so on. But this brigade, this 92nd Mechanized, is one of the most powerful, most mobile and most well-equipped brigade. And the Russians are hunting this brigade for a very long time. And during the previous months, starting from July, this brigade lost around 1,000 soldiers just with the rocket attacks. I'm not talking about the ground battles. Of course, during the ground battles, this brigade had a lot of losses as well. Another important number is coming from 95th Air Assault Brigade that located in Slavyansk area. The Russians are hunting this brigade as well, and we got report, and as a result of that attack during the previous hours, this brigade lost around 400 soldiers and up to 20 armored vehicles. The area between Izum bridgehead and Seversk, this north part, is under their responsibility. They are not also alone in this area. There are 81st Air Mobile Brigade, but we know that that brigade had a lot of losses in the Sherwood Forest during the previous weeks, so that's why maybe this brigade even were moved from their position, and now 95th Air Assault Brigade is the main power in this area. Who knows? I don't have such detailed information, but anyway, the Russians are hunting this brigade. Furthermore, they attacked their headquarters somewhere in Konstantinovka. Also, the Russians today told, and today they has officially accused, that the United States of America is responsible of spreading the coronavirus and monkeypox in the world. They found a lot of papers in Rubizhnoye, in this area. Let's take a look at the Russian sources map. There is even an icon about this. Yes, medical testing. There was some medical institute, some medical center in Rubizhnoye where the Ukrainians were testing their medicine things and bio things among the civilians in this area. There was a lot of tests of blood, a lot of things, very important. And the Russians took this area, and the Ukrainians didn't manage to move all the documents from this area, according to the Russian sources. And the Russians investigated these papers, and those papers made them think that the United States of America is responsible for spreading the coronavirus and monkeypox in the world. And also the Russians said that the coronavirus that we saw in China wasn't even it was like something like an action made by the United States of America. The coronavirus is totally was made in their bio labs and so on. So this is the thing that the Russians were saying during this report. So something like this. Another important update are coming today from Donetsk. If you take a look at the Russian sources map and you can see on Donetsk, you're going to see that this town is under very heavy shelling. Very heavy fire. Maybe the Ukrainians moved their artillery back or something like this, but anyway, this town is reducing to ruins during the previous 24 hours heavily. The thing is that today there was some kind of funerals in Donetsk. There was a woman. She was a colonel. Her nickname was Korsa. She was fighting on the side of DPR since 2014. And she was very famous in this area, but she was killed during the previous days, and it's a very big loss of the DPR. And today there was funerals. A lot of people came. These funerals were in the central part of Donetsk, in this area. A lot of people came to say goodbye to this woman. And at the time when the everything started, the Ukrainians start shelling this area, and today we got a lot of updates, a lot of reports about loss among civilians, about dead women, about dead children, and so on. So it's not very good. Of course, it's a tragedy day for Donetsk People Republic. Now let's talk about the improvements and some improvements on the map on the ground. Let's start with our Donetsk with Pesky. As if you remember during the previous video, in online mode, this map has been updated by the West Sources map, and this area was under Russian control. But today they have updated this map one more time, and now they're showing us more accurate picture. As you can see, the Russians controls just half of this town. There are clearing operation in this north part of Pesky. We discussed this north part many times. As if you remember, there are a lot of buildings, high buildings, so the Russians need time to crack this nut. But anyway, the Russians did a very great job, and furthermore, if we take a look at the map of this position, we know that this area near Pesky is protected by two brigades, 54th Mechanized Brigade, and Avdiivka is protected by 56th Mechanized Brigade. And today there was also some information included in the report of Ministry of Defense. They say that some brigades, some battalions, some groups of these 54th and these 56th Mechanized Brigade left their position, so there were some cases of desertion because these forces refused to continue fighting because there were some kind of like myth, because they were, according to their words, there was no report, there was no support from artillery, from tanks, and so on. So the Russians are advancing in this area. And if we take a look at the Russian sources map, they even shows the real place where some kind of desertion was. This icon of desertion of 56th Mechanized Brigade in Avdiivka. So right on the edge, right on the front line, this area between there were battles since the 2014 in this area, and as far as I understand, the Russians managed to crack this nut because they did some breakthrough on the south, taking this fortification, and after that they started offensive operation from few sides on the south of Avdiivka, and forces from 56th Mechanized Brigade just left their position because of no possibility of keeping this area anymore. Another update of desertion was from Seversk area, from this area. In the area between Pokrovsk and Bakhmut, there is also an icon showing that 58th Mechanized Brigade, but according to map of this position, this one, it's 58th Motorized Brigade, they also left their position. This brigade was responsible for Bakhmutska, for Solidar, for Pokrovska. They got a lot of losses during the previous period. If you remember, there was a case of friendly fire of this brigade when they were trying to retreat. So they left, and as you can see, according to this even map, the Russians took this plant that we discussed yesterday. And today we got more and more reports from the Russian sources that they're doing some clearing operation in this plant. So they're cracking this nut slowly, but they're doing this. And as we can see, the entire front line is collapsing very slowly, but it's collapsing. Furthermore, if we take a look at the West Sources map, there is updates. This map has been updated even on near Bakhmut area. As you can see, now the West Sources map are showing that Semigorye, Dolomitne, these towns is under Russian control. And it's true, because today we got more and more updates that the Russians are pushing Kadema and they try to crack this net. The only difference between Russian sources and this map is that the Russians are saying that Travnevaya, the town on the south of this area, is also under their control. But according to this map, this town is still under Ukrainians. I suppose that very soon we're going to see that maybe if this town is still in the gray zone, I suppose that maybe by the end of this weekend we're going to see entire collapse of the south, because the Ukrainians can't keep this area anymore because of high level of desertion, of big losses, and so on. We know that this area is under protection of 72nd Mechanized Brigade and National Battalion, right sector. They're located in the south and they have a lot of losses. So that's why I don't think they are going to keep this area for a very long time. If we are talking about the north, as you can see, there is no changes. The Ukrainians accumulate a big number of forces near Seversk, but the Russians are not pushing Seversk anymore. They are pushing on the south, as we discussed many times in my projection and so on. Seversk, nobody even tried to do anything with Seversk. I suppose that the Russians just decided to fix the Ukrainians, and they are not giving them even a possibility to leave this position, to reinforce Bakhmut. And I think that forces near Seversk really don't want to do this, because for them it's much more better to stay there, because on the south it's a hell on the south. The Russians are pushing all along the front line. They're ruining Yakovlevka, they're ruining Belogorovka. There is a battle since Solidarin east part, and the Russians are saying that they're going to take this town in 4 days. There are very heavy clashes in Bakhmutskaya, Pokrovsk, as you can see, according even to the West sources. Map is under Russian control. They're showing just small part of west part, that this part is under the Russians, under Ukrainians, sorry, but this part is also under Russians. So the situation near Bakhmutska is very, very critical. But today we got another updates, another report, and these reports we can see on the West sources map, and also we can see these updates on the Russian source map as well. This one, if we take a look at the West sources map, they're just showing us better picture of heavy clashes, of the fact of heavy clashes that was confirmed. As you can see, the Russians started their offensive operation on the Izum bridgehead towards Slavyansk, but it's not some kind of offensive operation. I suppose that they're just trying to fix the Ukrainians and not to give them to be flexible or mobile. If you take a look at the map of this position, you see that this area is under the responsibility of 95th Air Assault Brigade. As I told you in the beginning of this video, as according to the Russian report, they killed up to 400 soldiers. So that's why I understand that this area is very has reduced defense possibilities. So that's why the Russians started pushing. But it's not the main direction, it's not the main goal of the Russians. Of course, if they are able to crack this net all along the front line, they will push and they will establish control over new fortification, of course. But the main goal and the main direction is on the north, near town Nova Gusarafka, Chepel, near these towns. There is one important town, it's Shurovka, Nova Gusarafka and Bayrak, these towns. As you can see, according to this map, these towns is under Ukrainian control. But if you take a look at the Russian sources map, you're gonna see that at least Bayrak, Nova Gusarafka and Shurovka is under Russian control. If you take a look at the map of this position, they're showing us almost the same picture. At least they're showing that Bayrak and Nova Gusarafka, on this map it calls Chervona Gusarovka, these two towns, is under Russian control. This is a very dangerous and very powerful bridgehead, and today the Ukrainians were saying, including the report, that there is a battle around Gusarafka. Nobody says, we can't find this information in internet. The Russians did, I'm talking about Ministry of Defense, they're not saying about the territory progress at all, anything. We understand that these towns like Bayrak, Novogusarafka, Shurovka is under Russian control, according to the Ukrainian report. They didn't say that these towns are taken by the Russians. The only thing that they told, that the Russians were attacking Gusarafka from Novogusarafka. So that means that Novogusarafka is, if the Russians attacks from Novogusarafka in direction towards Gusarafka, that means that Novogusarafka is under Russians. So we can say that this area is under the Russians. This is their bridgehead, and of course they need to establish control over Gusarafka. This is a very important town, Novogusarafka. This is, we can say, logistic center in this area, and the Russians were attacking these two areas. Furthermore, the main goal, of course, to establish control over this back near Nortsovka. If you remember, a few days ago there was an update that Ukrainians near Nortsovka, from, as far as I remember, 92nd Mechanized Brigade or maybe 95th Air Assault, I don't know, don't remember, sorry, they left their position. They were somewhere in this forest and they got command to attack cross the river or to start some commandos operation in the forest towards Izum to cut this road, the supply road from mainland towards Izum, but they refused and they left their position. So we understand that there are a lot of cases of desertion, so the Russians decided to use this momentum and started their offensive operation, and now they're trying to crack Gusarafka. Gusarafka is a very important area for many reasons. If we take a look at this area in zoom out mode, you're going to see that there is one river, there is another river, and there is one road. This gray line, you can see this line, this is a road, and this road leads towards Gusarafka, this one. So we can say that there's just one important road that leads from mainland towards this area. And from this area, the Ukrainians supports their forces in these towns like Chepil, Protokopovka, Petrovska, on this line. And if you remember, it's very big towns. And we can say that if the Russians are able to take Gusarafka, these forces will be cut from the mainland. Yes, of course, they are able to use some local roads, some local bridges, but they will lose the main arteria. So, and we discussed many times what the Russians want to do in this area. They want to establish control and to push the Ukrainians from this line, because there are a lot of forces in this area and the Ukrainians still try to cross and still to send some commandos, some RECO forces, and they are terrorizing the area that under Russian control. So the Russians are pushing, and I suppose that they will push and they will increase their push in these days. Furthermore, now let's talk about the south of Kherson. There is no updates from this area. The only important update that we got is that the Russians managed to collect around 30 BTGs on this area. If we calculate the front line, we discussed this, the front line is around 186, so that means that something around 6 km per 1 BTG in this area. But there are a lot of Ukrainians as well, but they are not starting their offensive operation, so we'll see. But we got more and more updates from Ukrainian sources that maybe they decided that they are not going to do any offensive operation because, to tell the truth, they are not ready, and they understand that if they lose, and of course they can calculate, if, for example, if we compare Kharkiv area, right? If you remember, there was a lot of report from Kharkiv area, and we calculated that there are around 1 BTG per 15 kilometers in this area. So this is some kind of defense state of army. So that means if Ukrainians are pushing, they can push, because we understand that 1 BTG per 15 kilometers is not much. So that's why the Ukrainians understood in the past that even if they would be defeated, the Russians wouldn't be able to start any counter-offensive operation because of lack of forces. But if we're talking about the south, we see that these 30 BTGs, it's around 6 km per 1 BTG, and this is offensive state. So the Ukrainians understand if they start their offensive operation and if they defeat it, so the Russians will be able to start their counter-offensive operation, and believe me, they will be very successful. And as the Russians say, on the neck of Ukrainians, they will be able to enter Mykolaiv and Odessa, and they will be able to establish control all over the south of Ukraine. So that's why the Ukrainians are very careful, and they're not trying to do any mistake in this area. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you that we condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good weekend. Thank you, bye bye.